Hey, what's up, everybody? Jumping here, and I actually have a really interesting story for you today that I personally think more people should be aware of and talk about. But first things first, I need to give a shout out to NC State Bacon for sending me this article. The article will be in the description. You should definitely read it. It's pretty interesting. Also, a link to his channel will be there as well. So I'm bringing on Obsidian today. What's up, man?
Not too much. Good to be here.
Always good to have you. We were actually talking about this over Xbox Live as I was reading the article. He wanted to read the article as well, and then we just started to have a conversation about this topic. And as we were doing that, I decided, hey, let's just go and record this and talk about this. So basically, this whole case right now is about this young man. He's 19 years old. His name's Justin Carter. And yeah, apparently he was playing League of Legends with some friends or some people, and then after the game they went on Facebook and they started to have a post-game conversation. Somewhere along the line, someone said something to him like, "Hey Justin, you're fucked up in the head, man." And he replied in a very distasteful, disgusting, and horrible way. Now if you want to know exactly what he said, I will quote him for you. Now remember, this is him, it's not me, this is his statement. So, according to this, what Justin wrote was, "I'm fucked up in the head alright. I think I'm gonna shoot up a kindergarten and watch the blood of the innocent rain down and eat the beating heart of one of them." Yikes. What do you think, Obsidian, of that?
Well, I think you went a little bit too far. Or a lot too far.
Now, according to his father, it says that his son followed up that claim with LOL and just kidding. Now, I guess somewhere somebody's seen that and then we're sensitive. You gotta remember, after Sandy Hook, a lot of people are going to be very sensitive to things like this. That person reported it to the authorities, they read it, they seen it, and the authorities, they're probably sensitive to things like this as well due to Sandy Hook. And they questioned Justin, and they determined that, I guess, they were going to arrest him, and he's been in jail now for about 6 months, and he has a bond of $500,000.
And I mean, that's such a ridiculous bond because his lawyer in the article, Donald H. Flannery, says that he's represented murderers with bonds of only $150,000.
Yeah. Now, it's saying that he's facing up to 10 years in jail for this because they're classifying this case as a terroristic threat. What would you say, Obsidian? Do you think he was serious with his threat?
No, I don't think it was serious at all. I mean, we both know someone who says very similar things. They say pretty fucked up stuff, and they make distasteful jokes at the cost of other people, and they're never serious.
Yeah, I mean, and I think that over the internet, I think a lot of people know people like that. You know, they'll say messed up things, racist things at times, they'll post on Reddit, they'll post on Instagram, pictures that are just not appropriate at the time, especially after a sensitive thing happens, like, for example, Sandy Hook. Our friend that we know that we will not name, he did that. He posted like a picture and made a joke about Sandy Hook. It was just not right. It was distasteful. It was disgusting. And the only reason why we're honestly friends with him is because we know him well enough to actually know that that's not really him. For some reason, it's his own sick sense of humor. To him, he thinks that by saying messed up, racist, terrible things, that it's funny and that it makes him cool or something, and he does it. Now, anyone who's not just completely ignorant will generally take what he says and say immediately, like, "Oh man, that's fucked up. You shouldn't say these things." I mean, that's really what this case, I personally think, is all about, is what you say over the internet, because I think we all know from online gaming, from Facebook, from Reddit, from Instagram, and all these other things, that people constantly post terrible things.
And I think that a lot of that just comes from the anonymity of the internet, and the fact that you can say whatever you want, and there's not really any way for somebody to come and find out who you are or make claims against you, especially on, Xbox Live or Reddit. Facebook, it is easier because your name is right there. Like, for instance, what he said, he posted on Facebook, and somebody saw it on Facebook, and then they were able to report his exact name and find out where he lived and report him to the authorities.
Exactly.
So I think when you give people the ability to be anonymous, they all of a sudden become a lot more courageous and a lot more bold in what they're going to say.
Oh, absolutely.
Because they're not as fearful of what could happen because they don't think it will happen.
I am a person personally that I don't enjoy texting. I don't like to text with my friends. I always tell them that, although people will constantly try to text me, and I'll say, listen, I prefer to talk. I'm more of a talker. I'm not a texter. And that's just, for whatever reason. But I personally think that when you are typing something, especially over the internet, it's so easy to say something that you really would never say in your actual real life, or really even feel. You're just typing something and you're walking away from it because, like you said, people are anonymous over the internet and they feel comfortable about that. So I think this case is more about what you say and what you cannot say. Now, I think one reason that people are talking about this so much right now and why this is becoming a bigger story is because of, well, the First Amendment and our right as Americans to have freedom of speech. But I think that most people don't really understand that in this case, it is actually okay for them to question him and to actually approach him and maybe even arrest him for making a comment like that. Because generally, when you're talking about freedom of speech in this day and age, you cannot actually directly threaten someone, slander them, all these things like that, because you might be serious. I mean, they really don't know. A lot of times someone will say something to friends or over the internet maybe, or write about how they're going to commit a mass shooting, and then it was never investigated, and then the person did it. So, I mean, that's something that happens all the time. So I understand why they would actually approach him, but it's just one of those things, generally what should happen is that, especially and they're claiming that this is a terroristic threat, they would question him and determine that this guy was not serious, this was just a sick joke, this was a terrible thing to say, and that he probably wasn't actually going to do it. Because I really do believe, from reading this and from watching a video about this and just listening to the details of this, that he's actually not a real threat. He never was in jail before. I don't think he's ever committed a violent crime or anything like that. So it doesn't really make sense why he is being charged with a terroristic threat that can land him in prison for 10 years. 10 years with a $500,000 bond, and they offered him a plea deal. That's one of the funniest things about this story. His plea deal was 8 years in prison. I mean, that's just terrible. I have a personal story I can tell somewhat, and this actually relates to my dad. Basically, it actually kind of relates to this, because the same thing that this guy that's happening to this young man happened to my father years and years ago. My dad was a racist. We lived in the ghetto. I talked about that before. And he was a hypocrite because, you live in the ghetto and you're around minorities, but yet you hate all the people and all this. Now, he was involved with, a group of friends. It was just other guys. And they were all the same way. They didn't like black people. They didn't like Jews. They didn't like Mexicans, whatnot. And they would just get together and talk about this. They were all in prison before. They got involved in the Aryan Brotherhood in prison. And basically, they would get together and talk about killing people, and maybe against the government as well, because generally when you're talking about someone who is truly racist, those people tend to be actually against the government because they view the government as, well, they allow all this to happen.
And something that stops them from being able to do what they want.
Exactly. So they would get together, and see, it was more innocent than it really sounds, because all it really was is a group of guys getting together, getting drunk, getting high, and talking a lot of shit. But one of the wives of these guys went ahead and reported them. And this actually was coming right after the Oklahoma City bombings that happened, back in the day. So you got to realize that the authorities and people in general were very sensitive to anything that could ever be related to something like that. Just like in this case where I'm 100% confident that this is related to Sandy Hook. Obviously, if someone says something like that, people are going to be sensitive to that and react differently because of it.
If every single threat that was made on the internet was investigated, you'd find that almost all of them, I'd say more than 99% of them, are all just a joke or trash talk or something along the lines of being anonymous on the internet.
Exactly. I mean, that's absolutely right. Now, one big difference between the case with my dad and the case with this young man is that my dad had prior convictions. He was a convicted felon. And the FBI actually, because they were the ones who came to my house when I was 3 years old and arrested my father, they targeted him because he was a convicted felon and he was convicted of manslaughter. He actually killed his first wife. But yeah, so that's why the FBI looked at him, knew that, he had potential of doing something that could be almost considered terroristic. That's pretty much was the idea, is that Oklahoma City bombings happened, and that case involved something very similar. These guys were racist. These guys were talking about killing people and all this kind of stuff. So when they were investigating, they looked at, all the different people, and they arrested them. And that's what happened to my dad. Now, they never actually, the FBI that is, they never actually was able to prove any of this, and he actually ended up going to prison again because he owned a lot of guns. That was the thing, like he was a convicted felon, and he had possession of a lot of firearms. So he went to jail for that, not necessarily the threat of terrorism. But like I said, the big difference here between this case and that case was that my dad was a violent person. My dad had the prior conviction to pretty much prove that, to say that this guy could maybe potentially do some crazy shit. This young man, he didn't have any of this. Generally, when they investigate something like this, they determine that he's not a threat. Should he be in trouble somewhat for a distasteful comment like that? Maybe, but nothing near what he's actually being charged with. And that's my opinion on the matter. What were you about to say, Obsidian?
Well, I was just going to reinforce your statement on how the difference between your father's case and this case is we're talking a convicted felon versus someone who's never been to jail, so we can assume never been to jail.
No, he's never been in jail before. Like, it actually says this in this article. This young man's very scared, he's confused, he's upset, he's sad. I think he's been on suicide watch as well.
Yeah, he has been.
Because of all this. I mean, you got to realize that, and we can even bring up Paula Deen a little bit. Things you say at times will ruin your life or your career. I mean, it's the danger of it. I think most reasonable people should be aware of the fact that we can't really say anything we absolutely want to. That includes the internet. If you're thinking about leaving an ignorant comment on a video or to post on Facebook, Instagram, Reddit, you should really question doing that after things like this. Although, like I said, this in particular really is a lot different from the right that we have under the First Amendment. When you directly threaten something, then the authorities do have the right to investigate you, maybe get a warrant, do whatever, to determine if you're actually legitimate threat.
Yeah, the more specific you get, the less protected you are.
Exactly. Now, you had an article that you were telling me about that kind of relates somewhat to this. Why don't you go ahead and read it off and tell the people about this?
I'll quote it here. On February 4th, the Royal Canadian Mounted Police contacted San Antonio Police and told them that they had a report of a teen here who had talked with other players online about, quote, shooting up a school in Texas. While the group played the game on an Xbox 360 system that allowed for verbal communication, the police report said, during the game, the teen, 16 years old, said he planned on getting guns from a friend in the Marines and would, quote, shoot a pregnant girl at school and shoot his best friend in the face. The report said the boy also mentioned that because SWAT may be on the scene within 10 minutes, they would have to aim for the head.
Or he would have to aim for the head.
Yeah.
Okay. You gotta understand, the difference between something like this and that. In that case, once again, this is something he was saying, this is freedom of speech, whatever, but he was directly talking about that he wanted to shoot up his school. He had his targets already in mind. He knew someone who could provide him guns. I'll tell you what, I will post that in the description as well, that article. So if you want to read that and check that out, go right ahead. Now, that is actually pretty interesting just because it does also relate to online gaming, and I think that most people, they can say that they've had experiences like this, like where someone will say something, or they might threaten you, say something terrible, like they want to kill your family, you know, whatever, online, over the internet, in games. It doesn't really matter where it happens, but it happens all the time. I mean, Obsidian, like, how often would you say that has happened to you?
I mean, it usually happens when I'm outscoring somebody or when somebody loses, which for me is pretty regularly. But it's never something that I really take on a personal level, because I always understand that, you know, when people are getting angry at a game or something, things can escalate, and they'll say things that they don't necessarily mean, and 5 minutes from then they'll probably not think the same way.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of like the heat of the moment, like, and I think that most people are guilty of this, including myself, where you can tell when someone's getting upset, and if you're talking to them over online gaming or anything like that, they'll say something to you, and then you bite back, and then it just blows up into this whole other thing. I mean, just look at any YouTube comments. Someone will say something, another person will disagree with it, and before you know it, there's like 20 pages of YouTube comments of an argument that's going on back and back and back and forth. You know, it's insane.
And everyone's mom is involved.
Everyone's mom's involved. Just personal attacks on every level. It's ridiculous, and it just happens all the time. Now, I do believe the internet needs to remain anonymous, and that people should have their rights. But come on, you have to be smarter than that. What do you think, Obsidian?
I do believe that the internet does need to remain anonymous, but I also think that people need to understand their rights and just how far they extend, and that they also need to understand that while the internet is anonymous, there are always ways of finding out who they are, and that's why they need to be careful with what they say, and that they're within their rights.
Exactly. I think that nowadays, more and more people are not aware of their rights. They don't really even care. Like, that's the craziest thing to me, is how so many young people especially, because what you guys have to understand is that being young, we are in a position that we might be able to change the world, change how things are. But you have to first be made aware of what's really going on. Now, I'm really into politics. I don't really talk about it much, but I am really into it.
Never get Jess started on politics, because he will never stop.
Yeah, I'll go on and on with a whole political rant about something going on. But generally, I don't do it over YouTube because I'm doing gaming and all this other stuff. It's really hard for me to speak about these kind of things generally because I'm talking to myself. But it doesn't really matter what my political views or how I feel. What really matters is you. Like, you have to get involved. You have to understand what's going on in the world and what's going on politically and socially. And hopefully, if enough people can wake up and start to want to change things, they will change. That is the only way that we will ever have our freedom of privacy, our freedom of expression, especially over the internet, because believe me, as time goes on, things are going to get worse and worse and worse. So it's up to you to really decide, do you want that or do you not want that? And hopefully you choose the right side and you get involved. But that's pretty much it. That's the message of this video for the most part. Anyway, guys, I really hope you have enjoyed this. Please like the video for me. Also, favorite it if you wouldn't mind. You can share it if you want. Subscribe as well. If you come across any interesting news articles that you think would make a good video, send me the link. And if I make the video, I will give you a shout out and put your channel in the description. I hope you guys have a nice day, and peace out!